The space pilot never really considered himself clumsy. In fact, he liked to think of himself as daring, heroic, the kind of man who could glide through asteroid fields with style and panache. Unfortunately, his reality leaned more towards spectacular disaster. As the sleek little craft careened toward the planet's atmosphere, alarms blared like a chorus of panicked aliens, lights flashed in an epileptic frenzy, and he yelped something that sounded like a combination of a battle cry and an apology. "I've got this, okay, maybe I don't," he muttered, gripping the console for dear life while simultaneously trying to avoid vomiting. The navigation system seemed determined to sabotage him personally, pinging in alien beeps and cryptic warnings he could neither read nor understand. Then came the crash. Not a gentle landing, not a heroic skid across the terrain. This was the full cinematic disaster. Sparks flew, metal groaned, a geyser of dust erupted around him, and the landing struts collapsed like fragile twigs under his weight. Somewhere in the chaos, an ornamental fountain exploded, sending water arcing perfectly over a perfectly polished courtyard, as if mocking his entire existence. Birds, or whatever passed for flying creatures on this planet, screeched in outrage and scattered. And in the distance, a line of alien women appeared, all pausing mid-step as though the universe had just offered them a live-action soap opera starring this ridiculously hapless human. It took him several awkward moments to realize that these weren't just locals, they were the entire colony. All female, highly organized, self-sufficient, and clearly not accustomed to male visitors. They had been thriving here, in what he assumed was a very peaceful and very rule-governed existence, for decades without a single man to complicate their schedules, their experiments, or their perfectly synchronized yoga routines. And now, here he was, in a cloud of smoke and embarrassment, flailing arms, hair plastered to his forehead, making it look like he had been electrocuted while trying to perform interpretive dance. The women reacted in ways that were almost comically uniform yet individually expressive. One fainted, landing gracefully in a heap of flowing robes. Another pinched her nose and whispered something that sounded suspiciously like a curse. A third, strong, tall, with shoulders like a warrior sculpted out of moonstone, crossed her arms, lips pursed, and studied him like a human puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. The pilot, ever oblivious, assumed they were merely concerned citizens watching a man demonstrate his version of emergency landing protocol. He waved, gave what he hoped was a charming grin, and waved again, only to trip over a jagged rock, sending himself sprawling onto the grass. His face was planted so firmly that he almost forgot which way was up. And yet, something strange began to happen. The fainting woman blinked open her eyes and glanced at him with something that might have been interest. Definitely curiosity, maybe more. The whisperer perked up, tilting her head in a way that seemed flirtatious. And the tall warrior? Her arms shifted slightly, her stance softening as though she were suddenly evaluating the human on criteria far beyond piloting skill. He noticed none of this, too busy trying to extricate himself from the rock and figure out why his shuttle looked like it had gone 3 rounds with a meteor shower. The colony's initial caution quickly evolved into fascination. A few of them began approaching him cautiously, offering alien drinks, tripping over each other as they attempted to be helpful. "Water!" one said, though the translation device in his helmet interpreted it as "mate." He laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, and nearly fell into another decorative fountain. It was at this precise moment that the situation shifted from simple disaster to full-blown romantic chaos. He had been a nobody crashing on a planet. Now he was an irresistible spectacle. Every gesture, every stumble, every flailing arm seemed to pull their attention like gravity, and he had no idea why. Their methods of showing interest were varied, absurd, and frequently painful. One woman tried to demonstrate proper shuttle maintenance by physically shoving him toward the wreck, while another grabbed his arm to pull him into what he assumed was a welcome dance, though it resembled more of a complicated handshake gone horribly wrong. Every move resulted in accidental touches, too close for comfort brushing of bodies, and more than one awkward collision with an alien gadget that whirred, buzzed, and spat sparks in protest. He yelped, apologized, and tried to maintain composure, but his very survival instincts were now intertwined with unwitting flirtation, and that made him, apparently, irresistible. Among all the chaos, the warrior woman continued to watch. She was strong, confident, and entirely unflappable, until he tripped, slid, and somehow ended up pressed against a bush in a position that made her blink in disbelief. She tried not to laugh, attempted not to be impressed, and definitely failed at both. There was something about his ridiculous incompetence, his sheer, clueless charm, that made her pulse quicken, though she would never admit it to anyone else, especially not to the colony. Meanwhile, he was still thinking only of escape, tools, and ship repair. But the colony had other ideas. Their attention was no longer casual concern, it was competitive, deliberate, and increasingly flirtatious. They began vying for his notice with gestures, verbal sparring, and subtle physical accidents that put him in increasingly compromising positions. He was being lifted, steadied, fawned over, and accidentally caressed, all while being utterly clueless about the emotional storm he had triggered. He had crashed into their world, and suddenly, that world revolved entirely around him, as if gravity itself had changed its mind and decided to favor clumsy humans. By the time he finally staggered to his feet, wiping smoke and sweat from his face, he realized two things. First, he had a very serious problem with surviving the landing itself. Second, he had a very serious problem with surviving the attention of dozens of highly competitive, extremely beautiful, and absurdly determined alien women who had now marked him as a prize, a challenge, and a potential mate all at once. He muttered under his breath, "Okay, so maybe I do need a plan," and immediately tripped over his own foot again. Somewhere in the distance, a collective sigh of exasperation and desire floated over the courtyard. It was the beginning of chaos, romance, and disaster all rolled into one, and he had no idea what he just walked into, or, more accurately, what had just crashed onto him. By the next day, the pilot quickly realized that surviving the initial crash was the easy part. The real challenge lay in surviving the colony's escalating obsession with him. What started as cautious curiosity had turned into full-blown, chaotic competition, and he was right at the eye of the storm. The women had decided, apparently unanimously, that he was now the central figure in their lives, a living, breathing, mate candidate, whose every move would be scrutinized, critiqued, and exaggerated for maximum attention. Breakfast was the first battlefield. The colony had meticulously prepared an alien feast, foods glowing with unfamiliar colors, emitting smells that alternated between intoxicating and terrifying, and shapes that defied human logic. He had barely sat down when three women simultaneously approached him, each trying to persuade him to taste their dish. One held a steaming platter of something that resembled neon noodles, another offered a jelly-like orb that quivered dangerously, and the third simply dumped a bowl of what he assumed were alien mushrooms onto his lap for ease of access. Thanks?" he stammered, picking up a glowing noodle, only for it to wriggle like a small snake and wrap around his wrist. The women all clapped lightly, eyes shining. He blinked. "Is this approval?" One of them tilted her head and whispered something that sounded suspiciously like, "Mate?" He swallowed nervously, nodding, and promptly got splattered by the wobbling jelly orb as the third woman tried to demonstrate proper feeding technique. Somehow, he ended up wearing more food than he ate. Next came the physical competitions. Apparently, the colony had a centuries-old tradition of assessing a mate's worth through displays of agility, endurance, and charm. Or at least, that's what he inferred when three of the women decided it would be fun to drag him to a courtyard for obstacle courses. He tripped over floating platforms, collided with swinging alien vines, and accidentally launched himself into a mud pit while trying to impress the tall warrior woman. She only raised an eyebrow, smirked, and offered him a hand, that he clumsily grabbed, resulting in an embarrassing tumble together. Somehow, he landed on top of her, both of them covered in mud, and they froze in an awkward tableau that left the surrounding women giggling uncontrollably. He had barely recovered when the intellectual trials began. Two robot-enhanced scientists cornered him by the observatory, quizzing him on alien physics, chemical reactions, and interstellar navigation. He bluffed, smiled, and answered everything with a combination of charm and panic. Every correct answer, or even every wrong answer delivered with bravado, elicited laughter, flustered reactions, or swoons from nearby observers. The pilot didn't know whether he was impressing them or making things worse, but the constant attention kept him spinning in a dizzying mix of fear, awe, and unintentional arousal. Romantic tension grew with the warrior woman. She shadowed him through every trial, teasing him endlessly, occasionally tripping him on purpose, and delivering small touches that were perfectly timed to make him stumble. When she corrected his posture during a stretching exercise, her hand brushed against his arm in a way that made him jerk back, knocking over an alien water feature. She merely rolled her eyes, smirked, and whispered, "You're hopeless, human," which somehow made his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. The tension was a slow burn, awkward and comedic, but undeniably present. Other women began employing increasingly absurd strategies. One tried to demonstrate her mate worth by performing an interpretive dance that involved balancing on floating crystals while juggling glowing orbs, nearly colliding with him at several points. Another attempted to serenade him with a musical instrument that emitted alternating squeals and melodic hums, causing him to cover his ears while secretly enjoying the attention. The colony's engineers had even rigged small holographic displays showing projected versions of the pilot performing heroic deeds, each more exaggerated than the last, to sway his favor. Even the colony's animals seemed to get involved, apparently trained to bump him towards certain women, or trip him into awkward positions for maximum chaos. A small, fluffy creature jumped onto his lap, sending him toppling into the arms of another competitor. He gasped, sputtered, and tried to apologize, while the women clapped, cheered, or feigned dramatic fainting, all part of a bizarre, ongoing competition he didn't fully understand. Through it all, the pilot remained clueless. He thought the attention was ceremonial, a cultural misunderstanding, or perhaps some test of endurance. He was focused on finding tools, repairing his ship, and not dying, completely unaware that he was now the most coveted being in the colony. His clumsiness, oblivious charm, and occasional flashes of heroism only made him more desirable. Each slip, stumble, and awkward compliment drew giggles, sighs, and long, lingering stares from the women around him. By mid-afternoon, he had learned two things. First, there was no escaping the constant attention. Second, the warrior woman had become the unexpected center of his focus. She was fearless, strong, teasing him mercilessly, yet protective in ways he couldn't quite decipher. Every accidental brush, every sarcastic remark, every shared laugh drew them closer, and he found himself looking forward to the chaos she brought. As the sun began to set, he collapsed onto a bench, exhausted, covered in mud, alien food, and misplaced confidence. Around him, the women whispered, plotted, and prepared new challenges. He muttered, "I just wanted to fix my ship," only to have a jelly-like dessert fall onto his head from an unseen hand. Somewhere in the distance, the warrior woman shook her head, laughing softly, as if silently promising him that his life had just been irreversibly complicated, and that the fun was only beginning. By the third day, the pilot had resigned himself to a life of chaotic attention and alien absurdity, convinced that escaping the colony might be impossible. Each attempt to focus on repairing his ship was sabotaged, not maliciously, but hilariously, by the women who now seemed determined to keep him around indefinitely. Tools were borrowed, and used as improvised flirtation props, schematics were replaced with love notes written in alien glyphs, and his lunch breaks became arenas for competitive displays of affection. The real turning point came when a sudden environmental disaster struck the colony. A minor seismic tremor triggered a cascade of malfunctions across the habitat. Water conduits exploded, floating walkways wobbled dangerously, and the colony's drones spun wildly out of control. Panic ensued, and for the first time, the pilot's reflexes actually mattered. Without thinking, he leaped into action, using his human ingenuity to reroute power, stabilize the walkways, and rescue a trio of panicked scientists from a falling observation deck. Every heroic move, though uncoordinated and often clumsy, drew the women's admiration, sighs, and in some cases, blatant swooning. His accidental competence made him a living legend overnight, and the competition to capture his attention escalated to absurd new heights. As the dust settled, he realized he was no longer just the accidental visitor or the comic relief. He had become the hero of the colony. And with heroism came complications. Suddenly, every gesture he made, every word he spoke, was interpreted as either flirtation or an invitation for more. A misstep in movement meant a hand brushed against a thigh, a sneeze sent him lunging into someone's arms, and an attempt to inspect alien machinery turned into a perfectly timed pose that could only be described as alluring. He groaned internally, wishing that heroism didn't come with so much romantic consequence. The warrior woman became his constant shadow. She followed him through corridors, offered him hands when he tripped, and teased him endlessly, all while maintaining a stoic exterior. When he accidentally got trapped under a malfunctioning energy shield, she yanked him free, sending them into an intimate tangle that left both of them laughing, flustered, and breathing too heavily. The other women observed with a mixture of envy and amusement, whispering strategies to regain his attention while he muttered, "I'm just a guy trying to fix a ship." His voice sounded entirely inadequate against the tidal wave of admiration, flirtation, and chaos. Meanwhile, other members of the colony had escalated their attempts at winning him over in increasingly ridiculous ways. One woman attempted to demonstrate her mate worth by creating a glowing, self-propelled cake that zoomed toward him at alarming speed, crashing into a console with a spectacular explosion of frosting and sparks. Another performed a complicated martial dance, flinging him into multiple walls, ropes, and a small pond in the process. Each misadventure was both humiliating and strangely intoxicating, leaving him flustered, smudged, and inadvertently appealing. Somehow, his inability to manage these situations only made him more desirable. The pilot also began to notice subtle, quiet moments that contrasted with the colony's chaos. The warrior woman would brush a stray speck of dust from his shoulder, offer him a hand to steady him on uneven ground, or quietly observe him with an intensity that made his heart race. He was slowly realizing that this wasn't just physical attraction. There was something about her strength, humor, and confidence that drew him in, even as he tripped over wires and alien vines in her presence. Every small touch, every shared laugh, every moment of mutual exasperation was building intimacy without either of them fully admitting it. Even the colony's pets seemed to conspire to increase tension. A small, feathery creature kept darting between the pilot and the women, forcing accidental brushes, tumbled falls, and lingering proximity that only intensified the already chaotic romantic energy. A misplaced paw here, a surprise leap there, and suddenly he found himself face to face with the warrior woman again, both of them laughing at the absurdity of it all while secretly savoring the closeness. By evening, the pilot had started to feel a strange sense of attachment. He had been utterly confused, terrified, and overwhelmed, yet he now found himself looking forward to the chaos, anticipating the teasing, and secretly enjoying the accidental intimacy. The warrior woman's subtle touches and teasing glances had become highlights of his day, and even the ridiculous gestures from the others, cakes, dances, holograms, were part of a vibrant, exhilarating world that he hadn't realized he could be part of. As night fell, the colony was alive with celebration. Holographic lights shimmered, laughter echoed across the courtyards, and the pilot found himself at the center of it all, still clumsy, still confused, but undeniably part of their chaotic, affectionate ecosystem. The women whispered, plotted, and schemed to gain his favor, while he muttered apologies for every bump, tumble, and misstep, unwittingly deepening their adoration. He realized, with a mixture of dread and excitement, that he was no longer just a visitor. He had become a hero, a romantic target, and an accidental participant in a game of desire he couldn't escape, and secretly, didn't entirely want to. By the time he collapsed onto a bench, smeared with mud, frosting, and alien grime, he couldn't help but glance toward the warrior woman. She stood nearby, arms crossed, lips curved in a teasing smile, eyes glinting with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. He sighed, muttering to himself, "Maybe fixing the ship isn't the most important thing anymore." And for the first time, he wondered if maybe surviving the colony wasn't about escaping. It was about finding his place in the chaos. And maybe, just maybe, with her. The morning air was thick with anticipation, energy, and the faint scent of alien flowers, though for the pilot, it mostly smelled like chaos, sweat, and whatever substance had exploded in his hair yesterday. He had spent 3 days surviving a storm of attention, affection, and ridiculous competitions, and now it seemed the colony had reached its critical mass. Every woman in sight appeared to have a plan, a scheme, or a bold strategy for winning his favor. He had spent the previous night trying to repair his shuttle, but even that small attempt had ended in disaster. Wires sparkled, panels clattered, and a small holographic projection of him tripping played repeatedly, apparently considered entertaining and desirable. He didn't want to admit it, but he was exhausted. His pride, his nerves, and his clothes, well, those were all completely ruined. And yet the colony had somehow intensified their attention overnight. Cheerful chaos greeted him as he stepped outside, a barrage of simultaneous greetings, gestures, and gentle nudges that were impossible to dodge. One of the engineers accidentally sprayed a cooling mist on his face while demonstrating an experimental fan, and he stumbled into the arms of a woman wielding a glowing crystal staff. Somehow, he ended up sitting on the edge of a fountain again, smeared with unknown substances, as the women clapped politely, or flirtatiously, around him. The shuttle sat in the courtyard, finally operational, or as operational as a human clumsy vessel could be after 3 days of alien interference. He ran through his final checks, muttering to himself, hoping that fixing it would finally end the romantic storm. But the colony had other ideas. They gathered around, circling him, offering advice, instructions, and more importantly, attention. He had become more than a visitor. He was a spectacle, a hero, and whether he liked it or not, the center of every woman's orbit. He attempted to focus on the task at hand, adjusting panels, calibrating engines, and muttering technical jargon to make himself feel competent. It mostly worked, until a small feathery creature leaped onto his shoulder, causing him to lose grip on a critical tool. He flailed, sending it flying toward the floating crystals where the warrior woman caught it effortlessly. She rolled her eyes, handed it back, and said something that sounded like, "Hopeless human," though the tone made him suspicious that she was teasing him affectionately. His chest fluttered, heart beating faster, and he realized with a mixture of fear and delight that he actually cared what she thought. Meanwhile, the other women were escalating their attempts. One unveiled a holographic projection of a romantic scenario, complete with glowing hearts, falling stars, and a slightly terrifying depiction of him as a heroic conqueror. Another staged a performance that involved acrobatics, singing, and glowing alien fabrics that tripped him repeatedly. Every gesture, every accidental brush of his hand, every awkward tumble only heightened the tension and hilarity. He was caught between escaping the colony and enjoying the absurd intimacy, though mostly, he just wanted everyone to stop throwing things at him. The warrior woman stepped forward finally, separating herself from the chaos with a calm authority that contrasted perfectly against the colony's madness. She took his hand, not a casual touch, but one that lingered, strong and steady. He froze, unsure whether to pull away or lean in, and of course, that hesitation made her smirk, eyes glinting in a way that made his stomach twist. The other women, seeing their chance, started gentle nudges, playful provocations, and dramatic displays of affection, but she didn't flinch. She held her ground, silent but commanding, and he realized in that moment that she was the one he had been drawn to all along. A sudden minor crisis, a misfiring energy conduit, forced him and the warrior woman to cooperate in fixing it. They leaned, stretched, and maneuvered in tight quarters, hands brushing, bodies close, and hearts racing in ways that were both dangerous and thrilling. He tripped, she caught him, they stumbled together, and somewhere in the chaos, he realized he wasn't thinking about escaping anymore. He was thinking about her, the way she laughed at his incompetence, teased him relentlessly, and somehow made him feel capable even when he wasn't. The colony, recognizing the pairing, erupted in dramatic approval. Some cheered, some swooned, and a few sighed in mock despair, plotting how they might redirect their affections elsewhere. The pilot, still flustered and covered in alien grime, barely had time to gather his thoughts before the warrior woman leaned close and whispered something that made him blush in a way that was entirely human and entirely uncontrolled. With the final systems checked, the shuttle powered up, thrumming with energy and readiness. He glanced back at the colony, realizing that leaving would mean leaving behind more than just a chaotic, hilarious, and overwhelmingly affectionate world. It would mean leaving behind the warrior woman who had captured his attention, his heart, and his very sense of humor. He swallowed, adjusted his helmet, and held out his hand to her. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before taking it, and suddenly they were both laughing, clumsy but triumphant, as they boarded the ship together. As the shuttle lifted off, the colony waved, cheered, and, true to form, managed one last barrage of chaotic gestures, confetti-like alien petals, holographic projections of hearts, and a few strategically tossed glowing orbs that narrowly missed the craft. He laughed, leaned toward the warrior woman, and muttered, "I think we survived, and maybe even won," only for her to nudge him teasingly, smirk, and reply with a tone that suggested she had plans for the next adventure. Floating into space, leaving the planet's chaotic love storm behind, he realized something important. Humans were clumsy, flawed, ridiculous, and hilariously ill-prepared for alien rituals, but somehow, charm, ingenuity, and a little bit of luck could turn disaster into heroism, fear into romance, and chaos into laughter. He glanced at the warrior woman, whose smile reflected every absurd, adult, chaotic moment they had survived together, and knew that this was only the beginning of an adventure far more entertaining than any solo mission.